Alright guys, BLM here, back with a new video, and we're finally here. The new cast for Survivor has finally come out, and here we're going to be doing a cast assessment for Survivor 41. Now this has obviously been a long time coming. Obviously we had a massive layoff here since Survivor 40, and this season is very much being branded as the start of a new era. And by a lot of the things that we've been hearing about the season, I think we can certainly see why. Now, before talking about the cast itself, I am going to be talking about some more general thoughts on 41, most of which obviously being around its format changes. Now, some of these I did already talk about in my previous cast reaction video, but obviously we did get confirmation that it is going to be 26 days, which again, I still do think is probably for the better. Again, Survivor's been struggling to edit their episodes properly due to how much they have the show, and I do think by reducing that to 2 days will make that a bit easier. Also, it gives the players less downtime to where we're going to have more aggressive gameplay. We also get rid of reward challenges for the most part. Like, I really feel like this is overwhelmingly a net positive, despite it losing its iconic nature of it being 39 days. Though I will say that I don't love that they are really trying to make this season difficult from a condition standpoint. They've been talking a lot about how they're not going to give the players food and how they're going to have to give up things to get things throughout the season. It's like all this stuff is like, that's not good in my eyes. Again, like I don't get why Survivor is going down this road, because Survivor has been so much focused around the game in recent years. And to me, the survival aspects of Survivor are actually the thing holding it back from having an even more dynamic game, where because of the conditions, you're having these players having to think about how they're going to survive, how they're going to find food, and all these things over actually being able to play the game. So it is weird that they are taking away from the game to put it back into the survival elements, which is something that they've been very much neglecting in recent years. But I do think part of that is them trying to prop up like the personal journey element of the show, which is something that they have been very much focusing on in recent years, where I am 100% sure we're going to be seeing a lot of confessionals from a lot of these people talking about the hardships that they've overcome in their lives and how Survivor relates to that. We also found out a couple other like weird format changes, such as things like the game within the game, which is something that's like, why is this a thing? Feels so pointless to me. We also have Jeff introducing twists to us by literally talking to the audience. Again, it's kind of similar to what happened in Survivor Borneo, where in Borneo, like we would have Jeff like introducing tribal, introducing camp life, and like all these things. And it's like they're going back to that, which feels kind of weird, but I'm not overly opposed to it. I just feel like more than likely it's going to come off as super cheesy. But despite these things, I'm actually still really excited for this season. Obviously, it's more Survivor. It should be fun, and a lot of that is due to how great of a cast we have here. I really do like this cast. This is obviously the first cast since the diversity mandate was put in place at CBS, and you can very much tell, again, this is a very diverse group of players here, and certainly an older cast of players here. I mean, yeah, we have a few 20-year-olds on the cast, but we also have a number of cast members in their 40s and 50s, which is a pretty big surprise here. So it's not just diverse in terms of race, but also in terms of age. And I do think most of them have come here to play, and I'm excited to see how it plays out. Now, obviously, through this cast assessment, we are going to be assessing all 18 players of the cast, and let's run through them in alphabetical order. Obviously, at the end of the video, I will talk about who my winner pick is, but for now, let's get started. The first player on the cast here, we do have Brad, and one of the older people on this cast here, 50 years old. He is a rancher, and to me, the person that comes to my mind after reading his bio is Terry Dietz. I kind of look at him as probably going to be a slightly more strategic Terry Dietz, because I do think most people that they cast nowadays are going to be on a higher level strategically than obviously someone they would cast back in the teens of Survivor. But I do get very Terry Dietz vibes from him. I mean, he does talk about how he is a pilot, talks a lot about his family, also a similar age as Terry Dietz when he first played. Now, he does compare himself to Boston Rob, which, again, I can also get that comparison, especially a modern Boston Rob. I do think that overall, though, I don't see him winning the game. I do see him as someone that's probably going to make the merge. However, he kind of screams out as like a mid-merge boot to me. Probably not one of the first few boots. Probably someone that is going to be good in challenges. Again, I do look at him as a Terry Dietz figure, and obviously Terry Dietz was very good at challenges. So I kind of see that with Brad as well, but not really someone that I'm actually looking at as a true winner candidate. Next up, we have Danny. And Danny is someone that in the preseason, again, when I did my cast reaction video, when I just saw the cast, my first gut instinct was Danny's going to be my winner pick. He is an ex-NFL player. To be honest, his background very much seems similar to me as Alan Ball. And actually, I'm getting the same sort of vibes as I got from Alan Ball in the preseason, where I was very high on Alan Ball in the preseason, which obviously did not end up being correct. But I do look at him as a pretty similar sort of player. To be honest, in retrospect, he is probably more in line with like a Ben. He does mention that Ben is his favorite player, but I can very much see that through his bio. Again, like he does seem to be someone that is going to be very honor-based, probably more so than your typical Survivor player nowadays. Talks about his pet peeve as lying. Like, I still feel very good about Danny. I will say that I'm probably a bit lower on Danny than what I was before the bios came out. Not necessarily because he does anything that negatively here, but again, the comparisons to Alan Ball, and really even the comparisons to Ben, do kind of worry me a bit, but he is still someone that I definitely am considering as a winner candidate. Next up, we have David, and David for me right away, first thing I thought of when I saw his picture was this guy is a young David Sampson. Now, in his bio, he does compare himself to Russell Hantz, which, I mean, like, I guess could also be a decent comparison. But again, I very much see him being a younger David Sampson. Again, this person that plays way too hard, way too early, and will probably end up blowing up his own game along the way. Now, I don't think he's necessarily going to be the first boot. Like, I do think he is going to be a physical asset to his tribe. But there's no way this guy's getting to the end. No way this guy's even getting like anywhere close to the end. Again, he's a neurosurgeon. He compares himself as stubborn. Again, he compares himself to Russell Hantz. I feel like he just comes off as a very alpha individual and one that isn't very adaptable. And I really just don't see him playing well here. And like David Sampson, I kind of see him being one of these people that makes moves that are probably ideal strategically on paper, but like not really recognizing the social ramifications of those moves. Now, for all we know, he could be playing this up for the bio, but again, like based on what I've seen, I do feel like David is not someone that is going to be long for the game. Next up, we have Deshawn, and I really like Desean. Desean seems like a really fun personality here. He does call himself the love child of Suri and Wendell, which I kind of find humorous. Really, to me, like he kind of comes off as like, maybe like a mix of Suri and Jamal. I feel like that's probably a more apt comparison in my eyes. And I will admit, for most of the people on this cast, I'm not fully aware of how much of fans they are of the show, but I do get the sense that Desean is a pretty big fan, and that's obviously a factor here in me being pretty high on him. He does talk about how he's good at all three facets of the game. Again, like Jamal, he does feel very introspective and well aware of his emotions. However, to me, he also just comes off as a more fun version of Jamal. Like, I really like Jamal, but I do feel like part of Jamal can come off as a bit cold, while I feel like Desean seems a bit more lively. I overall do really like Desean, and he is definitely someone I am considering as a potential winner candidate. Now for Eric Abraham, who I've heard that like he's possibly going to go by Abraham, which just feels kind of weird. But again, another one of the older people on the cast here, 51 years old, cybersecurity analyst. And I really want to like Eric here. He does seem like, again, like another possibly fun personality. He should do okay considering how many older players there are on the cast. But I will be honest, I don't feel great about Eric. And one of the main reasons for that is that I did read in one of his interviews that he was talking about playing it slow at the beginning, which is just the complete wrong approach, I feel like, for someone like him. I feel like for someone like Eric, again, you want to be making alliances. If you're someone that, again, is already on the older end of things, I do think you want to be making alliances. You do want to be making relationships. You do want to be putting yourself in a good position very early on, not just kind of riding the wave. And also with this being a 26-day season, that means the gameplay is going to be a lot more aggressive, and I just feel like he's going to be left out to dry. I do think if we take that away, there are elements of him that could be a good player, and hopefully ends up changing his mind by the time he gets to the island and does play a bit more aggressively. But to me, he kind of just screams out as like a very middle school player of Survivor, like someone that would be on like Survivor Nicaragua or Samoa or Tocantins. He feels like a player like that isn't really adapting to what the modern game necessitates from him. So because that, not feeling great about Eric. Next up, we have Erica, who is one of the few Canadians on this cast, and Erica to me is fine. I think she could be an interesting player. I mean, she is someone that I would not be surprised if she is a massive fan of the game. She just talked about how she loves Todd, which, by the way, Todd gets a lot of love in this preseason, which very much screams out to me that they told them to watch Survivor China, because there's no way Todd would be mentioned this many times if they didn't tell them to watch Survivor China. But I do think her comparing herself to Todd and Brenda does feel like maybe an apt comparison. She does seem like a very savvy person. I do think she is going to be a potential big player if she's able to get into a power position. Now, I will say that Erica's bio is actually pretty strong. I feel like she says all the right things, though I feel like she is one of these people that knows what she's supposed to say in their bios and won't actually be able to execute it while on the island. This one is purely more of a gut instinct here on me not having Erica as a winner candidate. As again, like, I think there is definitely some potential there, but she isn't someone that I ended up being overly impressed by the end of it. Next up, we have Evie, who is a massive mixed bag for me. I feel like just on paper, Evie seems like someone that could potentially have some like Aubrey Bracco upside to her. I do think she is someone that seems to be a very intelligent person and someone that would be able to figure out the game of Survivor pretty well. However, from what I understand, she is not a super fan. She is not someone that is that big of a fan of the show. I think she's like a recent fan, which, to be fair, doesn't really matter that much. Again, as long as you have the basic knowledge of the game, that shouldn't matter too much. Though something that will matter, and something that I do very much question, is her very feminist ideals. Not that that's necessarily a bad thing, but I think like when she's listing men as her pet peeves and talks so much about her political beliefs over the course of her bio, it does kind of worry me that she is probably going to be a bit too set in her ways. She's not going to be very adaptable, not being willing to work with like the alpha guys on the cast, maybe get targeted because of that. Now, I do think this is a pretty solid cast for her if she is going to be that way. But I also don't fully believe that she is going to be that way. I do think part of it is probably her just playing it up. I mean, we have seen people like Spencer Bledsoe from Survivor Cagayan, and even on Big Brother, we had like Dan Giesling and Jordan Parhar like pretend to be people that they're not so that they would get cast. And Evie could be doing a very similar thing. And I feel like she is someone that seems intelligent enough to do something like that. But I just feel like there is enough hesitancy there with me to where I do think there is a decent potential of her being one of the first few boots. But if she's able to get beyond that, I do feel like she's some decent equity at that point, but still not enough for me to have her as a top contender. Next up, we have Genie, who I really like. I feel like Genie's going to be someone that is extremely likable over the course of this season. However, I do very much worry for her in the game. I look at her right now as having almost 0% chance of winning the game, largely because I do feel like she is going to be very likable. Again, she does feel like kind of the Elaine type, like obviously radically different people, but still someone that is, again, one of the older people on the cast. She's 46, someone that is going to be very likable. And if she does make it towards the end of the game, I just feel like there's no way they're going to let her sit in the final 3 chairs. Like, how are you letting this person get to the end? Now, I will say that I don't look at her as that strategic of a player. Now, she does talk about how no one will think of her as strategic, but I just don't get the sense from her that she is going to be the most active game player out there. That also makes it seem to me that, again, she's probably not going to be able to maneuver her way towards the end, even if that sentiment starts to come up. Again, I do think she is a very likable person and someone that I feel like is going to be pretty good TV, but more than likely someone that, even if they do allow her to get pretty deep into the merge, I feel like there's no way they're going to take her to the end. And I feel like more than likely she is going to be one of the earlier boots on the season. So overall for me, not feeling great about Genie. Next up, we have Heather. And I really don't know what to do with Heather. I feel like Heather and someone else that we'll be talking about later are kind of similar to me in my assessment of their games. However, I feel like more than likely only one of them is actually going to end up succeeding. I mean, while, yeah, we do have a lot of older players on this cast, I still do think most of the older players are going to be targeted relatively early on. However, because there are more of them there, I do feel like a decent amount of them are probably going to make the merge to the point where they will probably make the end game stretch. And I think Heather is someone that could very much do that. I can very much see Heather making it far into the game if she is able to make it past the merge. I think the question for me is like, how active of a game is she going to play? I think the initial instinct for me when I see her is someone like Elisa Welchel, who obviously didn't get the respect from the jury by the time she got to the end. However, I think in other ways she can probably be like a Sunday from Millennials vs. Gen X, where if she got to the end, she probably was going to win the game. I think it really all comes down to how active of a player Heather is going to be. Now, Heather is a big fan. I believe she is one of these people that has applied for years and is finally on. But, I mean, to be honest, some of those people typically end up bombing. But yeah, I do actually feel pretty good about Heather. I actually probably am higher on Heather than the other person that we'll be talking about later on. But there's enough variance there to where I don't really have her as a winner candidate. Next up, we have Jairus? I believe he is going by JD from what I heard, so let's just call him that. I really like JD here. I mean, JD to me is someone that, despite him being 20, which is obviously a bad sign, I do feel like pretty young players typically don't have the life experience that is necessary to play optimally, especially in the endgame portions of the game. And I do feel like JD here could fall into that, but I do think in some ways I do kind of see him as a Michael Yerger type. I mean, he does talk about a lot of things that he's already done. He does seem to have a lot of life experience, despite him only being 20 years old. He does seem like a pretty big fan of the show as well, though I do very much question him calling Fabio one of the all-time greats. He seems to have interacted with varying groups of people. Again, he seems to have a decent amount of life experience, and I do think he seems like a very likable guy. I do think if he was probably in the 25 to 30-year-old range, JD would for sure be a top contender for me. However, because of his young age, I do still have a lot of worries there, despite me really liking him. And speaking of 20-year-olds, we have another 20-year-old here. Next up, we have Lyanna, who, again, I really like also. However, I feel like Lyanna, even more so than JD, I feel like is probably going to be susceptible to just having a lack of life experience. Now, while her bio does seem very impressive on paper, it very much screams out to me as someone that has mostly experienced life through her academics. And again, I think she is a very intelligent person. She does seem like someone that is very, very book smart. But I do worry about how she's going to end up interacting with a lot of the other players here. Mind you, it is very similar to how I thought of Hannah from Big Brother 23 at this point, where I ended up being kind of wrong about Hannah. I mean, I'm kind of right. But as of right now, Hannah's playing a pretty strong game there. And I feel like Lyanna could be in a very similar position. And again, I do really like Lyanna. I would like her to do really well. I just don't know if she's going to have the life experience to truly bond with a lot of the players that are out there, and even beyond that, be able to pick up on certain social cues that would allow her to play more optimally. So because of that, not really considering Lyanna as a winner candidate. Next up, we have Nasir, and I love Nasir. Nasir, I think, is for sure going to be my rooting interest on this season. He just seems like a really likable guy, and he is someone that is a massive fan of Survivor. He has talked about how he learned the English language through watching Survivor. He has a really interesting backstory where he grew up poor, living in a mud hut with no electricity or water, and now he makes multi-million-dollar sales. Again, that's a really solid story there, and I think for sure he's going to get a decent amount of screen time talking about that. However, I will say that I do worry about his early game. Now, I think in many ways he kind of reminds me of Tai Trang, in the sense of he's this player that's coming into this cast with a very thick accent, and I think that could definitely harm him in terms of initial social integration. However, again, he does seem like a very fun personality. I'm hoping that's enough to get him into these alliances. But even if he gets further into the game, again, there is the worry of, is he too big of a threat? Are they not going to allow him to get to the end? And also there's the worry if he gets to Final Tribal, is he going to be able to articulate his game, which was a major struggle that Ty had. And I feel like Ty really struggled largely due to the language barrier. But I do feel like Nasir is someone that I could see playing a more active game than Ty did, especially in the end game, and could be able to overcome that. And also because I just genuinely really like him, I did have him as a potential winner candidate here. Next up, we have Ricard, and another person. I love Ricard. I think Ricard is another one that has so much potential in the game here, but is also someone that has a little bit of a worry in the fact that he is half deaf, which we have seen deaf players play Survivor before. Obviously, we had Christy, we had Nina, and both of them very much struggled socially in the game. And I think part of that comes from, obviously, when interacting with a deaf person, you might have to act differently than what you normally would. You would have to talk louder. And I feel like these sort of things could stop someone from wanting to bond with Ricard, which is a massive worry there that they might think like, oh, we're not going to include Ricard in this because we don't want to deal with that, which again would obviously be a shame, but I also don't actually see that as actually happening. While again, it is a worry and there is a chance that happens, I don't think it is very likely. I think Ricard comes off as a very likable person. He seems able enough in all facets of the game. I think he's going to be a fun character. I mean, I love how when asked how he's going to play the game, he says, Aubrey Bracco, but win. He is a flight attendant, which I think typically is a good sign. I mean, obviously we saw Todd and Tina be flight attendants and win the game, though we just saw in Big Brother Brent was a flight attendant and that didn't work out that well. But I do overall feel really good about Ricard. And add that he's also like kind of the perfect age for Survivor. I've talked about this in the past. I think the perfect age for Survivor is late 20s, early 30s. He's 31. I think that's a good age. Again, really just everything for me makes me think that Ricard is the perfect pick here, but he does have the fact that he is half deaf. That does add some hesitancy there. But for me, definitely someone I am considering as a winner candidate. Next up, we have Sarah Wilson, who feels like one of the more standard Survivor casting picks. I feel like Sarah is the type of person that would have been cast before the diversity mandate. When I instantly look at her, the first person that comes to mind is someone like a Haley Ford. And really, that's kind of where I see her trajectory going. I mean, she's obviously young, attractive. She seems to be pretty smart. She seems to be athletic enough. She talks about how she loves poker. Again, she seems like a good pick on paper. However, people of her archetype do typically go home early. I mean, she does kind of fit into this like secretly smart bikini babe sort of girl that like does go home in the pre-merge. And even if she were to get to the merge, I do feel like she's someone that is going to have the fight and actually play really hard in order to get the respect from the jury, which again is obviously very possible. But I just feel like I'm a lot more confident about certain other players on this cast than Sarah here. So sadly, she is not a winner candidate for me. Next up, we have Chantelle, another one of the Canadians on the cast. And I will say that Chantelle is probably the woman on this cast I feel the most confident about. I mean, if you haven't been paying attention, all of the winner candidates I have picked so far have all been men. And I do feel like in general, I feel a lot more confident about the men of this cast than the women. However, again, Chantelle, I feel like is the person I feel the most confident about. Again, she's 34. Kind of in that perfect age in my eyes. She does seem to have a lot of life experience. I mean, she is currently a pastor, but has been in a gang. She seems to have gone through a lot of hardships in her life. She is also a big fan of the show. She has talked about loving the show for years. Again, everything is there on paper. I do really like Chantelle. However, again, I just feel so much more confident about some of the men on the cast here. That kind of leaves her out of true contention here. But I do think Chantelle is a player that definitely has a lot of potential and someone that I wouldn't be surprised to see playing pretty well. Next up, we have Sydney, and I love Sydney. I just think that she's going to be a very early boot. I think my first instinct when seeing her is that, oh, she's like Natalia. Like, that's the vibe I got from the clips I've seen of her interviews. And it's like, Natalia was obviously a relatively early boot. I then read her bio when she talks about being like really wacky and weird. And it's like, that gives me Simone vibes. Again, another really early boot. And then I read her interview with Mike Bloom, and then it reminded me of So Kim. And I'm like, this is another very early boot. It's like, I feel like almost nothing about Sydney screams out to me as someone that is going to do well in the game. I really would like it. Again, I love Sydney. She seems like she's going to be a fun character. Again, she seems like a pretty intelligent person in real life, though I do think it's probably someone that is way overconfident, someone that is a person that's going to be perceived as a bit too controlling and probably end up getting voted out at one of the first few opportunities. Again, I don't feel good about Sydney, but I would really like to see her do well. Next up, we have Tiffany. And I feel like Tiffany, for me, was one of the hardest players on the cast for me to read. I feel like based off her bio, I just really didn't get that much from her. When talking about players that she'll play the most, like she compares herself to like Ozzy and Colby, which again, not how I would see her. And again, even Parvati, which again is like, okay, I guess. But she is the other person like Heather that I was saying before that I think one of those two are going to do very well in this season. I think one of the older women are probably going to make a deep run here. It's just a matter of which one it is. I am leaning towards Heather. I feel like Heather seems to be the person I have the better read on at this point. But I wouldn't be surprised if Tiffany does pretty well as well. I mean, based on her interview, she does seem to be a pretty big fan of the show. She talks about how she got engaged while watching Survivor. Talks about having watched the show since Borneo. So, I mean, like, again, she is a big fan. I mean, she does feel like a like kind of younger version of Janet to a degree. I don't know how likable she's going to end up being. We'll see. But still, again, I overall do feel a little bit more confident about Heather than I do with Tiffany. So Tiffany's not really a top candidate for me. And the final member of the cast we have to talk about here is Xander. And Xander, off the bat, instantly made me think of Jack from IOY. Of being this obviously young, athletic guy, this like Aussie Joe kind of archetype, but not necessarily exactly like them. Again, probably more in line, like he compares himself to Jay. I think that's probably an apt comparison. Though I do also worry that, like, he mentioned that he can come off as intimidating, which is a massive red flag to me. The fact that he knows himself that he can come off as intimidating probably means that he isn't as chill as he's coming off in his bios, in his interviews, which I do think if he is someone that does come off as a bit aggressive and intimidating, I do think that is a bad sign for him as a player. I do think that makes him a lot more likely to be taken out early in the game and makes him a lot more likely to be the merge boot, which I do think is a big worry with him just in general. I do think he is one of these players that should be guaranteed to make merge, but is more than likely going to be targeted very soon afterwards. And I do think if he is too aggressive, he probably gets taken out even before that. Now, I do think if he is able to be a bit more chill, possibly win some challenges, get into alliances, he could make a deep run. But again, I just very much have a hard time seeing him actually winning the game, as I just don't see how he's going to get there. And I do feel like if he does end up getting there, it's probably because the perception of him isn't that good to begin with. Again, I just feel like he's a personality that I don't fully exactly know where he's going to go at this point. But based on how I assume he's going to be perceived, I'm not feeling too great about Xander here. But there we go. That is every member of the cast of Survivor 41. And with that, I have narrowed down my winner candidates to 4 people. We do have Danny, we have Deshawn, we have Nasir, and we have Ricard. Now, when narrowing this down, I feel like the first person I'm going to cut here is Nasir. I do feel like Nasir is probably on this list largely due to just how much I really like him, and I would really like him to do well. But realistically, I just feel like he is so much more high variance than the other 3, so I do think I'm going to have to cut him. Now, beyond that, I am going to cut Danny as well, because, again, Danny is someone that, again, I was feeling very good about before the bios came out, but also that's kind of how I felt about Alan Ball. And again, it's screaming out to me as Alan Ball, and I'm worried that he's going to be like Alan Ball and be a bit more bombastic of a player. But even if he's not, he does talk so much about being like Ben and being loyal and not like lying and stuff like that in his bio. That is also a red flag for me, so I did cut Danny. So now we're between Ricard and Deshawn. And for me, this is very tough. I feel like these are 2 very strong winner candidates. And I'll be honest, like, I feel like Ricard would be my guaranteed number 1 if it wasn't for the fact that he was half deaf, which, again, I think can cause some social issues for him that do make me question if he should still be my pick. Because, again, Deshawn, I feel like, doesn't really have any flaws. I don't have any flaws with how I perceive Deshawn at this point. I mean, yeah, I do think he could be a potential threat in the endgame, but so can Ricard. So the choice between these 2 is still pretty tough. However, I'm going to go with my gut, and I'm still going to go with Ricard. Mainly because, like, while I do have hesitancies with him being half deaf, I don't actually think it's going to be that big of a deal. Again, it's just something that could potentially go disastrously wrong, but I don't think it will. But beyond that, I just feel like he seems like the most able in all 3 facets of the game. He seems like a very fun, social guy. He seems to at least know the game decently well and should be good strategically. And he seems physically able to where I wouldn't be surprised if he wins a decent amount of comps post-emerge. So for me, I just feel like Ricard is the person on the offset that I feel like I have the most confidence in, to where despite that minor hesitancy, it's not enough to really knock him away from my number 1 spot. So Ricard is going to be my winner pick for Survivor 41. And there we go. That is my cast assessment for Survivor 41. Before we go, I might as well give kind of a minor update on the channel. Now, if you've been following my live streams, you very much should know about these things, but I might as well talk about here. Some pretty big Survivor rankings that are coming up. Before the Survivor premiere, I do want to get out my Survivor premiere episode ranking. That is a project that I decided to do before the premiere of Survivor 41, where I rewatched all 40 Survivor premieres and ranked them. So hopefully that'll be out within the next couple weeks. But to also go along with that, for the finale of Survivor 41, I decided to do the same thing. in ranking every Survivor finale. So that will be a video that will come out in December. However, along with that process where I rewatched every finale in the history of the show, all 40 finales, I decided to kill multiple birds with one stone. And through that did a couple other major rankings as well. So in the time between now and when Survivor 41 finishes, I will also be releasing a ranking of every final tribal council, along with a ranking of every final tribal performance. That will be split into two videos, one with just the winners and the other one with just the runners-up. But I did actually take the time to rank every final tribal performance, which took way too long. But stay tuned for those videos down the road. I also feel like this is probably the final time I'm going to be doing this year, but I might as well also plug my Twitch channel. Again, I am still streaming at twitch.tv/TheMarinian where if you want to hear my thoughts on Survivor 41 as the season is going, you can follow me there. I do plan on streaming Wednesday nights after the episodes, typically around 11 p.m. Eastern time, give or take. But even beyond that, if you just want to ask me questions or hear about what's coming up on the channel, that is a good way to do so as well. Now, the plan is to be covering Survivor 41 in a similar way to what I did with Winners at War, where we will be doing a mid-season power ranking halfway through the season around the time of the merge. And I will obviously do a season review at the end of the season along with a player ranking. So stay tuned for all those videos. And even beyond that, we have a lot of other stuff going on right now as well, with us reaching the end of Australian Survivor and Survivor South Africa. So season review and player rankings of both of those are coming. A&W 13 is nearing its end. Big Brother is ending in less than a month. The Circle is coming very soon. The Challenge is currently on. Big Brother VIP Australia is coming that I'm debating over whether or not to cover. There's even potential for the Challenge All-Stars too. Again, there is a lot of things going on right now where videos associated with those things will be coming out at some point. But for now, that is my cast assessment of Survivor 41. Thank you for watching.